What does it mean to you to be present in life? That answer is different for all of us. However, unearthing the answer begins with having a conscious presence when it comes to defining what humanity means to you, and having the wherewithal and foresight to live in the moment of now rather than being consumed with what comes next. For Jake Sasseville, he describes himself as a serial media, music, hospitality entrepreneur, author, and podcaster. He's also the CEO of Imiloa Institute in Costa Rica, and he was also the youngest late-night host for ABC, and the White House even named him one of the most innovative entrepreneurs under 30. Imiloa is booked years in advance, and clients renew at a rate of 86%. The Institute really allows all beings to get in touch with their consciousness and to be in harmony with ourselves and the planet. And Sasseville joined me this week to tell me more. I'm Kevin McShann. Let's have this conversation. If you're ready, I'll take a moment to welcome you to the program, buddy. And I'm super excited to learn all about your personal and professional journey today. Great to be with you this afternoon. And happy Friday, my friend.
It's nice to be with you too. Happy Friday, Kevin.
Absolutely. Now, Jake, I know that you run an institute which allows people to really get connected with their inner consciousness and help them create a world with better harmony. So I'm wondering if you can tell me about all the great work that you do.
Well, I don't know if it's all good, but it's certainly in the spirit of service of human beings. Imiloa is a retreat center and a center for transformation. And it's really as much about the transformation that people get coming here, Kevin, as it is about the human beings that work here. You know, we are as impacted by the work that Imiloa does as the retreat participants that come on retreat. We started it almost 5 years ago here in Costa Rica, and we've grown it since. And it's been, you know, a really beautiful experience.
And what's been the most impactful experience for you personally as the head of the organization?
You know, I think great question, by the way. When I really started to realize how much I was making stories out of things that happened as the CEO and as the co-founder of Imiloa. In other words, there's what happens in life, and then there's the story of what happens. And what often occurs is these things tend to collapse into each other, and it becomes a bit of a vicious cycle. We believe that the story of what happens is what actually happens, rather than just looking at life for what it is, which is that certain things happen. And as human beings, we're meaning-making machines. So we're making meaning out of what's happening. And so with the biggest transformation that I've experienced as the CEO of Imiloa is really recognizing those two distinctions, that there's what happened and then there's the story of what happened, and they're actually different, and they don't have to become one, and they don't have to rule my life if I'm aware of it.
Yeah, absolutely. And Jake, I'm also curious to ask you, what does it mean to you to live a meaningful life?
I think that to live a meaningful life, these are great questions, Kevin. To live a meaningful life is to live a life of service. I think that oftentimes human beings want to find some divine purpose. And really, what I recognized from my life is that service is, or purpose for me is really knowing, loving, and serving that which I call God, which usually means loving, serving that which is each other in our own humanity. And so I think that a meaningful life is one of contribution. I had a Buddhist monk once say to me, Kevin, he said, our lives are fulfilled in direct proportion to the care and concern we have for others. And I really think that is that definitely feels like the truth to me.
Yeah, absolutely. And Jake, I know that you were one of the youngest late night hosts for ABC, and the White House has even recognized you as one of the most innovative entrepreneurs. So I'm wondering how those experiences impacted your life and how you grew from them as well.
Well, when I did the ABC show, I was 21 years old, and so I was quite young. And what that did for me is I was really looking to fill what I considered to be a goddamn God-sized hole that was blown through me in my younger years when my brother was diagnosed with cancer and later died from it. And really, what I tried to do, Kevin, is I tried to just bury that as best as I could by being busy with work and trying to be famous. Because I thought, well, if I could be famous, then maybe I could help heal myself and my parents a little bit. And that obviously proved not to be true. What happened in the process is I created a pretty interesting show and experience for myself. I think that all of life really is just a bunch of experiences. So I created the show and the experiences that went along with that. Um, and one of the things I realized about the whole White House thing, you asked about how that impacted my life. I'd say I realized that to be weary, meaning to be just aware of when people are recognizing each other for things that they've accomplished. That really what I try to do now is I try to recognize people for who it is they are and where it is they've come from and what it is they've learned and been able to transcend, not necessarily for what it is they've accomplished. It feels kind of empty. I think that's why watching Hollywood award shows feels kind of empty to me now. And I'd rather just be, recognizing people for who it is they are and the challenges that we've overcome, because that really is our shared common humanity, isn't it, Kevin?
Yeah, absolutely. Jake, I'm going to share just a little bit about myself. I don't know how much
Sure.
research you did on me, but I was born with what's called spastic quadriplegia cerebral palsy. Simply means that I don't have enough oxygen in my legs to walk normally. But I really view my disability as a chance and a perspective to look at life from a different set of lenses from everybody else. So I'm curious, when you think of the word perspective and really diversifying your perspective, what does that mean to you?
What does it mean to diversify my perspective?
In your in your opinion, yeah. What does that mean to you?
When I'm looking, well, first of all, thank you for sharing a bit of your story. And it's remarkable that someone who is living with that is doing this type of work in podcasting. I think this is really, really cool. I got to tell you, Kevin. Um, so that's number one. So I celebrate and acknowledge you for that. Um, and in acknowledging you, I totally forgot your question. It was about perspective, and it was
Yeah,
about what shapes perspective.
yeah. How do you define perspective in your view?
Well, I do wonder if perspective is just time plus wisdom from asking questions. So much about our lives, the quality of our lives is determined by the quality of questions we ask ourselves on a day to day, moment by moment basis. And so I think that, for example, when someone feels frustrated, I've learned that frustration is just a belief that something can be different, but just isn't different quite yet. And so there's that space in between the emotion and what is being experienced. And then that can cause frustration. And so the reason why I bring that up is because I wonder, I haven't thought much about what perspective is to me, but I wonder if perspective is just the space and time in between events, along with the wisdom that comes from the questions that we ask ourselves as a result of what we experience. Maybe that's perspective.
Yeah, and just building on that part of our conversation, Jacob, I know that experiencing different experiences is important to you. I know that your dad was a social worker and your mom was a substitute teacher, and you grew up in Maine. But when you turned 16, you studied abroad in France, twice. So I'm curious to ask you about that experience and the value you place on having a diversified experiences.
Yeah, I mean, I didn't know what I didn't know back then. So the fact that I went to France as a 16-year-old was really just to escape my reality of what was going on with my brother and what was not a very healthy family dynamic at home. That said, I do think that because I managed to create so many experiences for myself, Kevin, when I was younger and really chose to live life instead of being defined by my circumstances, it allowed me to have a more world view of what was possible. And so that's something that serves me to this day. So while it wasn't always easy to be me, or wasn't always easy to figure out how to make ends meet, or connect the dots in my life, I am very grateful that I had an energy and just a certain longing for understanding life that pushed me out and to be experiencing different aspects of life, whether it was traveling or whether it was starting and failing at businesses or, more self-reflective journeys. I think that all of that has really helped shape who it is I've become. And in many ways, even though life is still not always easy or hunky dory, life, it's helped me live life on life's terms, which is accepting life for what it is rather than trying to make it into something that I want it to be.
Yeah, absolutely. And, Jake, for me personally, I really believe that personal growth and reflection is an important sort of aspect to personal advancement. So I'm curious to ask you, how do you make sure that you're sort of not living in the space of complacency and really challenge yourself to be better every day?
It's another good question, Kevin. You're really rocking on with these questions today. I appreciate that. So, look, I know what I know now, not necessarily what I knew back then. Back then, in my 20s and 30s, and even yesterday, I was just trying the best I could. Right? I believe when we do know better, we do better. Um, I do think that a thing that I've done that has really allowed me to be mostly in the present is to be, well, first of all, to tell the truth, and also to live life on life's terms. In other words, to deal with what's right in front of me so that the past gets put in the past where it belongs. For so much of my life, I allowed my past to come into my present and therefore to create my future. We all have the stories of different things that people did or didn't do, or different things that happened or didn't happen. And if we tell those stories too often, what was in the past actually starts to affect what's happening right now. And what's happening right now is a pretty big miracle if you think about it. You and I are talking on a Zoom call where people are listening to this conversation. There are birds singing where I am in Costa Rica. I don't know where you are in the world. Where are you in the world?
So, buddy, I live in Windsor, Ontario, Canada, right across the river from Detroit.
So good. Okay, so you're in Canada, so it's probably a very different climate there. And think about by being fully present, here I am talking to a nice guy in Canada. I'm in Costa Rica. We're talking about ideas and things that matter so that people who are curious about life and what they're creating in their own life can bring that into their lives. That's pretty miraculous. And I couldn't really be present with that if I was thinking about what I did yesterday or what someone did, what wrong someone did to me 2 weeks ago. So I just try to live as fully in the present as possible so that the past gets put in the past where it belongs.
Yeah, absolutely. I always tell people if you dwell on the past too much, you're detracting from making progress. Jake, would you agree with that?
I would totally agree with that, Kevin. That's a good one. I hope you're writing some of this stuff down.
Well, when I publish the book, I'll make sure you get 15% of the commission, okay?
Okay. Okay. That's great. That's great.
So, Jack, I wanted to ask you about resiliency and hope because, based on the personal struggle with your brother, it caused you to be more resilient and look at life from a different perspective. So, I'm curious, when you look at resiliency, hope, and optimism, what do you think of, buddy?
Oh, that's interesting. Did you say, what do you think of, buddy?
Yeah,
You're great. You're great. Kevin, you're great. I just love this. When I saw my brother sick, I witnessed someone in such a massive amount of pain. I remember a few days before he died in June of 2003. He was 13 at the time, and I would have been 17, and he had a disease in his lungs called graft versus host disease, which was brought about when he had a bone marrow transplant. It conflicted with his body, which is the concern every time you kind of have a bone marrow transplant. And I remember it was right before Mother's Day or right after Mother's Day and before Father's Day, whatever it was. And he was wheelchaired out to our deck, and we lived in a very modest home. I think it was like 690 square feet, 3 bedrooms and 690 square feet. It was a small home, same home my mother was raised in. And I remember him wanting to go out to look at the sun, but he couldn't open his eyes because his eyes were kind of glued shut because of the steroids and the dis-ease of the graft versus host disease. And so, but he still wanted to go out and experience the sunset. And I remember sitting out there with him, and they pointed his wheelchair in the direction of the sun, and he just basked in the sun. And to me, that is a picture that I have in my mind of what resiliency looks like. His body was completely unable to move, essentially 25% usage of his lungs. He was 13. He had gained probably 60 pounds because of steroids. And yet he still was kind, and he still was wanting to experience the nice things in life, which was a sunset. So that's what I think of when I think of resiliency. When I think of optimism, you also asked about optimism. I think optimism is something that is curated, something that is created daily through how we choose to react. I think our first reaction is not our final reaction, and that how we choose to react to life and life situations is what determines how we'll respond, and if we'll respond thoughtfully and optimistically or with a bit more pessimism and concern and whatever it may be. So I think optimism has a lot to do with our reactions and then how we choose to react, and recognizing that we have a choice when it comes to how we react.
Yeah, and Jake, just talking to you, I can see that we both have a sort of synergy when it comes to really wanting to authentically connect with people and really get to the heartbeat of what makes them who they are. So I'm curious to ask you, when it comes to authentically connecting and communicating with people, what do you think of?
So when I think of authenticity, Kevin, one of the things that I think of is being authentic about how inauthentic we actually are, which means how can we be truthful about what we don't want to be truthful about? And to do that in conversation, that may mean being honest about how you actually feel in a particular moment instead of squashing it down. It may mean saying things that you're thinking about saying, but that you also thought about editing yourself on so that it doesn't offend or rock the boat with someone. Although I also don't believe that anybody should try to be offensive. I used to try to be offensive when I was in the television business because I thought it was a good way to get a reaction out of people and make good TV. But now I try to just be authentic about wherever it is I am, even if that's not particularly flattering. And to really be present with people in where they're at. Sometimes being authentic about where someone else is at means meeting them where they're at, even in the discomfort, right? So sometimes we can meet people that make us uncomfortable, but how can we be in that discomfort and show up anyways, rather than trying to do something else or move away or not interact as much?
Yeah, and Jake, to that point, I'm now curious to ask you about your first book, buddy, entitled Slightly Famous, which chronicles your life, certain aspects of your life. So I'm wondering if you could tell me about the book and what emotions you kind of went through when you wrote it, buddy.
Wow. Okay. Another good question. This is great. So I wrote that book in 2012, and I was 27 years old, and I really wrote it about the time period between age 18 and 22 or 23. And the emotion of when I was writing it, it was really about how I had left home, set out to become the youngest host in late night TV history set out to become the youngest late night host and became that when I was 21 on ABC. And then how I kind of screwed it up and lost it all when I was 22, 23. That's basically what the book is. And it talks about all sorts of different crazy stories from that time period. How I felt writing it, it's interesting. I really remember I wrote it when I was living in Chicago. And I believe at least the final draft of it, the real work that got done, was in November and December of 2012. And I remember this so specifically because I used to write in like the lounge area of the building that I lived in. And yeah, I listened to a song by Joni Mitchell called Both Sides Now. And I listened to this song over and over again as I wrote and wrote and wrote, and I cried and cried and cried. It was very cathartic for me, and it was very healing to write about these things in my life that I actually thought made me very unlovable. But now I was going to put them into a book, and it was a big moment. It was really challenging for me. And I'm glad that I did it. I look back now and I think, gosh, that writing is horrible, but that's also 10, almost 11 years ago. And yeah, it was a really nice experience overall, I would say.
Yeah, and you had another sort of life-changing experience at 29. Also, when you wanted to surrender and taking action instead of hustling through life. So I'm wondering what that experience was like for you in creating your own podcast, which I know was successful for you after only 12 episodes, and you
Yeah.
really came into your own there as well. So I'm wondering if you can tell me about those two combined experiences.
Yeah, so in my late 20s, what had happened was I was constantly hustling in New York for the next deal, the next TV show, the next whatever it was. And in my, I would say in my, yeah, like in my 27, 28, what happened was, well, there's always like an inciting incident. And so what happened was my house got washed away in a hurricane, and that was in New York City. And that really shifted me on a whole new path. But I didn't know it at the time. I had to go through that experience of loss. And so that's what happened. And then I ended up having nowhere to go. I lost my TV contracts. I lost my income sources. I felt really alone in the world in New York City. I crashed at friends' houses, but that wasn't sustainable for very long. And eventually I ended up in my grandma's basement in Maine, and she looked after me for what was supposed to be a month, but I ended up living there for 2 years. And in that basement, I discovered God. I discovered life, living life on life's terms rather than trying to make it be the way that I wanted it to be. I discovered acceptance and how it was the key to so many of my problems on whatever particular day it was. I discovered what it meant to, start and fail at 5 businesses. And the 6th one, like you mentioned, was a podcast, which worked. But 5 businesses over a year and a half that failed. So I discovered real humility in that basement, and I discovered a new way of life where I could take action and turn the results over to God. And I also discovered that I could connect more deeply with my family that I was really scared to connect with, because I thought that would make my dreams mean less if I connected more deeply with my family of origin. And it was quite the opposite, actually. It was really beautiful. I got to connect with members of my family that turned out only had a few more years of life at the time. So those 2 years were really quite special, and I got a lot from it. And yes, the podcast is one of the nice things that happened. It was successful after only a few weeks on the air, where we were getting enough downloads where we started earning money from our advertising revenue. And yeah, it was an interesting time.
Yeah, absolutely. And Jake, I'm always someone that one of the creeds that I live by is inclusion is the gateway to independence. Because one of the reasons I wanted to start this podcast was I looked at the world and there was so much societal division, for lack of a better term, and I wanted to create a vehicle that really challenge people to have conversations about progress in society from different perspectives. So my next question has to do with, how do you view inclusion in the world, and how do you think we can make societal progress towards unity?
Wow. Well, that's a beautiful question. I love your view that inclusion is a gateway to independence. That is a really phenomenal thought that I'm going to have to think on after this conversation together. I've thought a lot about unity, and I think that the way to create unity, or a way, not the way, a way, is to find ways to serve together with human beings. I have found that when I am serving endlessly, I am unified, often to myself and my own core values. And if I'm with someone else, then unified with their shared common humanity. I also love this idea of inclusiveness, and it's something I haven't thought about in a long good while, actually. So I don't have a fully formed answer in terms of the power of inclusiveness. But like I said, I love that it could possibly be a gateway to independence. And what does that really even mean? What does being independent really mean? And why is it so valued in culture and in society that we need to be independent rather than interdependent? Acknowledging, hey, I need you and you need me, and let's dance in the middle of the street together, rather than, hey, I'm going to be here in my house and you're going to be there in your house. And I think that society tried that. I think the North America tried that, and it certainly has a place. But there's something about being where I am. I'm in a Latin American country, in Costa Rica, in Central America. And one of the things that I love, even though I don't have family here, is I love the inclusiveness of the different families, and in particular, the intergenerational families, those who live all together from different generations. There's something very powerful about that. Rather than grandma having her house and mom and dad having their house and then the kids, it's like everybody's just kind of in one soup. Not necessarily in one house, but just the way in which they do it. So there's definitely something there that has struck me. And there's something there that is unity in action. I just don't quite know what it is, but that's an incredibly thought-provoking question.
Well, thank you, and I hope that it helped you to move your thought process forward in that regard as well.
Yeah, totally. And now I know I got to listen to other episodes of yours so that I can see where your own thought process goes, so that I can learn from that as well.
Well, I certainly do appreciate that. Jake, and I wanted to wrap up our conversation by asking you not only how you want your personal and professional legacy to be defined, but what does it mean to you to live in the present?
Oprah once said that our legacy is none of our business. And I loved that. Our legacy is none of our business. And what I think is meant by that is, if I understood your question properly, I understood your question about legacy, yes?
That's correct, yeah.
Yeah. So legacy really is about every person my life has touched. It's about every podcast interview I've done, every phone call I've made, every person that has been moved positively or not by something I said or did. My legacy, I can't possibly know the extent of which has touched. I can't know the extent that has touched other people's lives. And that's why I believe it's important to pray often, connect with that which I call creator and God, and to be able to serve human beings, because ultimately those moments, those small moments will culminate in a legacy. One, hopefully, that maybe, just maybe, will leave the world a better place. In terms of presence and what being present is for me, being present has been this conversation. What I've loved about this conversation is that I don't know what the next question is, but I'm so anticipating it every time I stop talking, because I know it's going to be something just so on point. And that to me is presence. There's a juiciness in the anticipation of what is. That is presence for me.
That's a fabulous answer, and I want to thank you for sharing that. And my final question for you today, Jake, is an easy one. If people want to get connected with you, my friend, what's the best way they can do that?
They can do that at Jake Sasseville on Instagram. They can also visit Imiloa, IMILOA Institute.com, where they can learn all about what we're up to here in Costa Rica as well. And if people use the promo code Jake, then they'll get $400 off any retreat ticket that they buy if they want to come down on a retreat here in Costa Rica.
Well, fabulous, Jake. I have to tell you, You're my last podcast conversation of the week, my friend, and I couldn't have thought of a better way to end it than having a thought-provoking conversation with you about presence, life, and being resilient in life as well. So I really want to thank you and for the work that you do and for joining me in conversation. It's most appreciated.
Well, I thank you, Kevin. This is a special, special show, and you're a special human being, and I appreciate all your time today.